So, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to Muslim Council of Britain's The Next Level. This is our webinar series that goes beyond our conversation. It goes beyond the issues that we have. Each session is about more than just talk. We're here to unpack, challenge, inspire action, inshallah. We expect honest dialogue and diverse perspectives, and we have fearless conversations with our thought leaders, change makers, and voices from every corner of our society. This isn't just another discussion, inshallah. This will be a movement. This past month, we're coming to the end of the Islamophobia Awareness Month, inshallah. So the title is We're Flipping the Script. So according to the government's most recent hate crime statistics, anti-Muslim hate crimes have arisen by about 19% in just the year that ends March 2025. That's nearly half of us, so almost 44% of all religious hate crimes are targeting Muslims. These figures aren't just numbers, they are representing real people, real communities, and real pain. From masajids being attacked by arson, to individuals being targeted in our streets, to others being maligned online, or any other mechanism that the far right and those who are opposed to us can think of, we are witnessing a really worrying rise of Islamophobia in the UK. Tonight, we will confront this reality, inshallah. So, in keeping with our topic, we just got a couple of housekeeping rules, please. Please type the questions in the Q&A section or even in the chat if you're finding difficulty with that. And we'll try to group the questions together. And we apologize in advance if there's loads of questions. We have limited time, but we will absolutely try to accommodate everyone. And Speaker Ali, inshallah, if he wants, if there's any audience participation, we can also unmute if anyone is happy with that as well. The event will be recorded and it will be on our Muslim Council of Britain YouTube channel, inshallah. So if there's anyone who misses it, please do forward the links. They are available on our WhatsApp channel, which we usually share, which we'll come round to at the end of the session, inshallah. So we need to mention our sponsors. Apologies, technical glitch. So we cannot proceed further without mentioning our sponsors here. We are sponsored by amazing organisations for this series. We are sponsored by the Muslim Association of Britain, which is a UK organisation dedicated to nurturing, supporting and leading Muslim grassroots contributions towards positive social change. MAB's work is holistic. They nurture change makers through spiritual, intellectual, moral and social, physical, growth-rooted family in the teachings of Islam, while supporting campaigns for social justice at home and abroad. And we're also sponsored by two other supporters. There's MEND, Muslim Engagement and Development. They work tirelessly to tackle Islamophobia through education, media engagement and advocacy, which is key really at the moment, and very topical to today's talk. And to Islamophobia Response Unit, who are independent charity dedicated to supporting people affected by Islamophobic incidents, including anti-Muslim hate crimes in England and Wales. Your partnership, these three organisations, their support ensures that spaces like this, where we are today, exist and where we can come together, speak truth and speak meaningful action, inshallah, and spark meaningful action. So I will put their website details, so if you want any more, in the chat. But I would like to first of all introduce our speaker for today. Please welcome Mr. Ali Milani. Ali is a distinguished broadcaster, is author and communications consultant based in London. He currently hosts various shows on his YouTube channel and can be found on the Fuba Radio, and is the creator of his own YouTube channel, which is dedicated to making politics more engaging and accessible. His journey is rooted in the lived experience, arriving in the UK at the age of 5 and growing up in a working class council home. Ali has always held a profound belief that politics should reflect the lives of everyone, not just a few. In his early days, he served as Vice President for the Union Development at the National Union at NUS, the National Union of Students, and as a Labour Party councillor in the London Borough of Heathrow Villages. He also stood as parliamentary candidate for Uxbridge and South Ruislip in 2019. And Ali's book, The Unlikely Candidate, charts his journey through politics and offers sharp insight into what it takes to make change happen. Today, Ali will draw on his rich background in media, politics, and storytelling, and he will share insights on how communication, identity, and public engagement shape the organizations and movements of tomorrow. Please welcome me in joining Ali Milani. Ali, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Zahra. That was such a nice introduction, and it took me through a nice, when they say,
History.
yeah, some people say that just before you pass away, you have flashes of your life, and you gave me that in real time. So I appreciate the the sort of journey through the years. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, and thank you to MCB for hosting such important events. I got to say, I've seen a market shift in that's this sort of community-based, activist-based, change maker-based work from MCB, which is so pleasing to hear. I am going to try and keep my contributions as short as possible, largely because I want to get to some of your questions. I always think that dialogue is more interesting than monologue, so I'll try and do that to the best of my ability. I've been asked today to speak to you about, in the context of Islamophobia, how we make serious change in the corridors of power, that particularly being Westminster and then the media in the UK. And that comes through a sort of my own journey in history in this space. So I've been in sort of the Westminster bubble, working in that area for over a decade now. I've been a candidate, I've been a councillor, I've been someone who is attempted to influence people in government, outside of government, political parties of all persuasions, and I've been a media commentator as well, which has been its own interesting journey. There was a nice plug of our YouTube channel that Zahra kindly included. We did a really, really amazing talk with Dr. Wajid, the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, on the issue of Islamophobia as well, which I really recommend everybody watches. I'm going to stick it in the chat because it covers in more depth than I'm going to be able to some of the things that we're going to comment on. So I hope it's okay that I plug that episode specifically for people to go and to watch and subscribe to. As it pertains to the sort of corridors of power, I'm going to try and share this very short presentation with you guys, and we'll go through where we are as a country. The reality is, I think, unfortunately, the Southport riots have highlighted the scale of Islamophobia that exists in the country, and often this is perceived to be an issue that exists in a fringe sort of elements of society and an underground parts of society. But the truth is far more chilling than that. The reality is Islamophobia has been normalized within our political parties and in our media. These are things that you already will know. But just to give you a sense of where we are in terms of the perception of Muslims and Islam in Britain, 1 in 5 people across Britain have a negative view of Muslims, of Islam and Muslims in general. In fact, the only group I think that has a higher sort of net negative rating in terms of perceptions are traveller communities. So the Muslim community, according to Pew Research, I believe, has amongst the highest negative perception ratings of anyone across Britain. And that's not an accident. These are the reflections of a coordinated campaign that has normalized Islamophobia. It's the kinds of headlines that we read in the newspapers. It's the kind of coverage we see on TV. And it's the words and policies that come out of the mouth of mainstream politicians. And this is really, really important because it's shaping the public perception has profound impacts on the lives of everyday Muslims, of communities, but of politics as well. And it ends up in a doom scroll circle where politicians say things that are Islamophobic, the media covers news and moments of profound national conversation with an Islamophobic lens, and that causes more of the population to have negative views about Muslims, and as a result, the politicians follow that narrative and say even more Islamophobic things, and so we end up on a sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy loop. That's why it's important that we interject in those spaces, whether it's in the media or in politics, to overcome this and change this. 1 in 4 British Muslims, or Britons, the British public, non-Muslims, would feel uncomfortable if a family member married a Muslim person. 42% of the British public believe British Muslims are more loyal to other Muslim countries than to Britain. And 28% of the British public believe Muslims will never be as British as other British people. And so this othering exists both in the public space, in the perceptions of the general population, but is also influenced heavily by and for our political spaces, our corridors of power, the halls of Westminster, the TV screens, and the ink on the newspapers that you will read. And I want to highlight that with a game of Guess Who, if we may. And this isn't going because you can't speak back to me. I just want you to reflect on some of the quotes that I show you and think about who may have said them. So
Chat if anyone wants to answer in the chat, and I'll read them out.
yeah, we could do that as well. So the first one is the new independent MPs were elected on the back of sectarian Islamist politics, alien ideas that have no place here. Don't put it into Google and show off, right? But who do we think said this quote about the new independent MPs, suggesting that they were elected on the back of sectarian Islamist politics with alien ideas that have no place here? We'll give it a second. Zahra, if you get anything, let me know. It's like I'll do the countdown.
Faraj or generic? Someone has put
Faraji. I like Faraji.
Faraji. Yeah.
I mean, you guys aren't far from being right. It's Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative MP and new leader of the Her Majesty's official opposition. Now, part of why this is important is this quote being, suggesting that independent MPs who were all bar one Muslim being elected off the back of sectarian Islamist politics, which isn't true, and who have alien ideas that have no place here in Britain, is something that you can imagine being said by the fringe parts of some of the more, I'll use the polite, sort of loony, right-wing, racist parts of social media. But they came out of the mouth of Her Majesty's official opposition leader. Let's go to the next one. Muslims are a nation within a nation, are not like us, and see the world differently. So these are different quotes from different pieces, but they include things like Muslims are a nation within a nation, are not like us, and see the world differently. Who do we think said that? Tommy
Tommy
Robinson.
Robinson.
Checks out, doesn't it? You know what? I'll stick to Tommy Robinson. We've only had one come back. That's Trevor Phillips, who was now the anchor at Sky News. He was actually suspended from the Labour Party for a period because of these comments. But he was also, I believe, the ex-chair of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. And he is one of the leading voices at Sky News, regularly interviews government ministers, opposition ministers, and is one of the sort of leading journalistic voices that exist in Britain. So the guess of Tommy Robinson, it turns out to be someone who anchors some of the most watched and influential broadcast news in the country, and the ex-chair of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists. I'm not going to let you guess that one. It's 30p Lee. Lee Anderson, who's a Reform MP. And Muslim communities are ignorant, illiterate, and not able to read, or don't often read. And again, Khalid Mahmood, who was then Labour MP for Birmingham, Donald Trump, who came under significant criticism for a tirade he went on inside of a mosque, which included the inference that Muslim communities don't read, are ignorant. And so part of the reason I show you these quotes is that the level of Islamophobia crosses party colours. It passes the dinner table test, as Saeed Awarsi once said, and it's mainstream. It's on your TVs. It's by official party leaders, by mainstream anchors of TV news, and it's pumped out again and again and again to a British public. And the result of that ends up being 1 in 4, 1 in 5, and 1 in 4 people in the British public having negative views of Muslims. And so it's important to note that Islamophobia test is not just, as Sayyid Awasi once said, pass the dinner table test. It has become political strategy. There is now a feeling in Westminster that attacking Muslim communities has benefit electorally in certain communities, certain constituencies, certain regions in this country. There is benefit to publicly attacking Muslims because of the level of Islamophobia that exists across society. And that's why it's important that we engage. It's not enough to complain about it. It's not enough to throw up our hands and be outraged when Trevor Phillips says something or Kemi Badenoch says something, but we have to interject into these processes of power. And so one of the things I wanted to do is, well, I'll talk first about Islamophobia not being a recent phenomenon. That's important for us to know as well. It dates back all the way to the mid 15th century. The sort of fear mongering and scapegoating and suspicion of Muslims and our religious practice as well. But, in a sort of post 9/11 world, it's shifted towards a more, are British Muslims compatible with British moral society and culture? And this idea that there's a threat, an imminent threat from Muslims and migrants in this country. And it's been reinforced by policy as well, from prevent to the migration policy that we've seen recently announced. So without taking up too much of the time, because I've got an eye on the clock, I wanted to give you some practical tips and some practical steps on how we can actually have an impact in the kind of advocacy and activism that we do in party politics, in Westminster, in the media. Now, these will be granular in detail. And I've done this specifically based on my experience and the experience of my team of what we think works in influencing change in Westminster. So it's not always the sexiest piece of work, if you will, but what are things that groups, organizations, individuals can do that has impact in the output? So I'm not really interested here in raising awareness. We always talk about raising awareness. Not a huge amount of interest in raising awareness. But what are pressure points that we can push, actions that we can take that at the end have real practical policy impacts that change things for our community? And so that's what I've tried to focus on, and I hope that's okay. The first one is about building relationships. Politics is people, right? I often say, and Zahra will know this specifically, that politics is competing stories that are told, and whoever tells the best, most compelling story wins. Those stories are told by individuals, and decisions are made by individuals. And so the way that you influence is predominantly, if you want to influence people in existing positions of power, now that's unless you want to change the positions of power, but people in existing positions of power, is to build relationships across political spectrums. And the reason that this is important is often we think of politics and policy through sort of ideas that groups and individuals and political parties are football teams, and I wear one color and you wear another, and we dislike each other and we throw things at each other. The reality is that if you put time into building relationships with people with key influence, then you're going to have a far higher success rate of being able to influence policy and make actual change that has tangible impacts on people within communities. And that means putting in time. So this includes things like having spreadsheets, for example, of people of different political parties and different departments, and making sure that your organization, your groups, your activist networks put in time to developing relationships with these people in these existing positions of power. That can be in Westminster, that can be MPs, that can be staff members, or that can be within key groups. Things like Amnesty International, for example, or Refugee Council, migrant groups. Can we develop influence and relationships to the point where when we have major pinch points of action, we can call upon these relationships and look at wielding influence in that regard. So one of the things that I would highly advise practically that you can do, and I am really looking at granular detail, is sit down with by yourself or with your teams and your organizations and map out where the power and the influence lies. Because the reality is, it's not often the prime minister making these decisions. These decisions happen in committees and meetings and groups all across the country. So if you're working on housing, who are the people who are able to pull the lever and make the change that you're looking to make? You don't need to go to the top. Who are the parliamentary undersecretaries, for example? Who are the different charities that might have the ear of governments, or the advocacy groups that might exist? So mapping out who exactly can make this change and who has influence in this area, and then taking real resources in terms of your time to building relationships with these people is hugely influential. This is another one I always say to folks in terms of how you develop, how you make real change, is look to the staff, not the politicians. You would be surprised at the lack of religious literacy that exists amongst, I mean, in our country as a whole, but amongst politicians as well, and how much politicians and political leaders look to their staff to guide them on different points of policy and different decisions and votes that they make. The same is true in the media. If you're trying to influence Sky News, for example, and I've just shown you Trevor Phillips, the best route into that is not talk to Trevor Phillips or talk to Sophie Ridge, for example, or Beth Rigby, who are on TV. Who are the producers, right? Who are the people who are putting these programs together? And can you build relationships and influence them? Can you speak to them? Can you convince them? Or if you're looking at foreign policy, for example, it's not Yvette Cooper as the foreign secretary that we need to speak to necessarily, although it is her as well. It's her special advisors, for example. It's her parliamentary undersecretaries. It's the junior ministers that exist in those departments. How can we look to the people advising and supporting our decision makers in office and in the media to try and influence their decision making and give them a better understanding? So if you can give a better understanding to the staff members who are advising the politicians, that is often as impactful, if not more impactful, than speaking to the politicians themselves. People have a this obsession with these roundtables and taking a picture with the politician and being sat down, or going to SW1 and taking a picture with the politician, with the minister, the governmental politician. But you'll have far more impact sat in a Cafe Nero with a special advisor than you will taking a picture with the foreign secretary, for example. Identifying the pinch points are really, really important. Historically, as much as we hope our governments make moral decisions, decisions on policy are made as a direct result of influence and political decision making. So, what are the pressure points that can be placed on politicians to move them towards making the right decisions? This includes everything from protest to organizing locally within constituencies, making sure that these issues are raised by constituents, by councillors, influencing local politicians to feed up the chain. Where are the pinch points in these decisions being made? No better example can be made of this than the recent budget. The two-child cap being lifted by the government, which in turn will lift, I think, hundreds of thousands of children out of poverty. This is something that the government resisted for a really, really long time. In fact, I think about £9 billion worth of welfare spending that was in the recent budget was as a result of activists and communities finding the pinch points and finding where the pressure points lie. So that includes MPs who had the whip withdrawn, community campaigners in constituencies, in key constituencies that MPs need to win and parties need to win to try and influence their position, think tanks putting out data that will influence the media. So where are pressure points that you can put your hands on and push to try and influence governments, politicians, the media as well? One of the best examples of this in the media, for example, there have been certain moments in which media coverage has been atrocious as it pertains to Muslims, and the Centre for Media Monitoring has highlighted this. One of the campaigns that we ran were actually submitting hundreds of complaints into Ofcom, for example, or encouraging and educating people that they can put complaints into Ofcom that has an impact on the way that the media covers, because once they get complaints from Muslims and non-Muslims who may see the level of Islamophobia in the media and those Ofcom complaints, they have to react. So with the media, Ofcom is a clear pressure point that you can place. Politicians, it's the ultimate vote that goes in the ballot. It's constituencies. It's groups that they may be tied to that support them locally or nationally. So as well as mapping out people and relationships and staff, map out where the pressure points are on the policies that you want to influence. This is really, really important. Telling them what to do, telling them what to think, telling them what to say. You would be surprised how many politicians walk into a voting chamber not knowing what they're voting on, having very little information on the policies that they're voting on. I have been baffled in my time in politics how many politicians. So, for example, the best example of this was the halal food debate. If you'd seen Rupert Lowe and others on the sort of far right started this furor about halal food. Yeah, Ofcom is the official regulator of the media for that for the person who had that question. So the Ofcom, if you Google it, they're the regulator that monitors the way that coverage is done in the UK, and they can intervene. So halal food debate. Why I say tell them what to think, say, and do. When I was discussing the halal food debate with MPs across the aisle, it was remarkable how little they knew on a topic that they were about to go vote on, debate in the Houses of Parliament. And the same is true in the media. So what you have to do is write briefings and or notes, whatever style you want to do there, to MPs that tells them on topics that you're passionate about, Islamophobia being one, exactly what the problem is, what position they should hold, and interventions that they can make, questions that they can ask, things that they can say. By making it, and literally we're talking 1 or 2 pages, MPs have to vote on, and MPs and media have to cover and vote on and debate policies on such a plethora of issues. To be fair to them, they can't be an expert on every single one, right? So one of the ways that's really important to impact them is make sure ahead of every influential debate, ahead of media coverage, in their inbox is set a clear, concise, and coherent briefing that tells them exactly what they should think, what they should say, and what they should do on a topic. Give them clear data, clear evidence for your positions, and make sure that they're aware of the important facts pertaining to the issue that you want to to influence. It doesn't matter if you have an existing relationship because they will open it. MPs have staff that open every single email, and they will most of the time read the things that you put out. And just having a competing idea sat in their inbox that present them facts that might be different to the other briefings that they'll be getting on these issues, because you know that whether it's the gambling industry, it's on tax, it's on banking, it's on Israel Palestine, whatever the issue may be, you know that they'll have briefings from your opponents sat in their inbox being told exactly what facts to look at, what story needs to be told. So make sure that that is existent in their inbox. And then rewarding support and discouraging hostility is really, really important. There are MPs that and journalists out there and media organizations that are doing an enormous amount of good work. It's important that they feel the support from the community, because often these are people who aren't directly impacted by Islamophobia. They aren't directly impacted by the issues that we care very closely from a community. So when they put their neck on the line, when they make serious interventions on behalf of Muslims, they should be supported for doing so and feel the warmth and community spirit that Islam is really based on, and our communities should be based on. So putting in some work and resources into rewarding MPs who and and journalists and media institutions when they do work that supports our community is really, really important. There tends to be this view of, well, that's what they should do, right? That's what they were elected to do. And that's true, right? But the reality is that's not how people work. They develop relationships and feelings about communities on a much larger scale. And so when they do things and vote on things and speak on issues and cover major stories that are of benefit, then they should be, you know, Rewarded is a difficult term. I don't know if that's the best term to use, but they should be supported in that. Equally, we shouldn't be afraid to pick public, peaceful fights on issues that we care about, and we shouldn't cower on that. So when there are MPs who want to ban halal meat in this country, that's not something we should shy away from getting involved with and representing our communities. So these are just 5 practical things that I would advise. I've hit my half an hour mark. So building relationships across the political spectrum, looking to the staff, not necessarily the politicians, identifying pressure points and pinch points. And but on all these 3 things, a real stakeholder map I would really advise. Who makes the decision? Who are the staff that influence those decision makers? And what do those decision makers consider pressure points that you can influence to try and get through to them and make sure that your voice is heard is really, really important. Being clear with briefings and notes exactly what your story is, and that competing stories are really, really important. What's the story we tell about Muslims in this country, and how can we tell that story coherently and effectively to leaders? And then rewarding when they do good things and making sure they know the dissatisfaction of the community when they do bad things. Those are the 5 practical tips that I can share. I don't know if that's been of enormous use to everybody, but I am more interested in your questions. And in the questions bit, I'll say this. I've spent 10 years in politics and in the media. It doesn't have to cover anything I've just spoken about. I want this to be a real open, honest, ask me anything and I'll answer it honestly on any advice that you may need, any questions you have about how we influence politics and media and overcome the meteoric rise of Islamophobia that is such a problem in this country. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. Half an hour and you've pretty much covered everything we need to do. So we do have a couple of questions, but I'm going to start off with just one in the chat, which is, can you define Ofcom? I think people just want to know some terms.
Yeah, so Ofcom, I kind of mentioned it briefly. Ofcom is the official regulator in the media. So that's where you go and submit complaints, and they're investigated if you see coverage that you think is biased or harmful or dangerous. So just stick it
The
in
first,
Google, and they've
yeah.
got a form that you can fill out. So, for example, I'm just trying to think of some of the coverage around the BBC on Gaza has been horrendous, and Ofcom is the place that people go to submit those complaints.
So some of the questions that have come in on the Q&A, you said broader issues awareness raising, not an important priority. Why?
No, 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 it is a priority. It just wasn't a priority for my presentation. I do have a thing about awareness raising campaigns. I think we do them more than we tackle actual policy influence. I think it is a comfort position our community has been in, because awareness campaigns are easy. You just run comms and you tell stories, and it's easier than the sort of weeds of policy. They are very important, but in the absence of actual policy changes and influencing work, the reality is Muslim communities are being dwarfed by some of the people who don't necessarily have the best interests of Muslims at heart with the amount of lobbying and influencing going on in Westminster. And so I just think greater work and priorities and resources needs to be placed on that than just awareness raising campaigns, if that makes sense.
The next question, in other words, Ali, why the focus only on Westminster here? What's the strategy behind that?
I mean, the reality is most power it shouldn't be, particularly with media. If we're talking about media, depending on where you are in the country, you will have local media that is profoundly important and influential. And when I spoke about media relationship building, if you're a local organization, local activist group, masjid, whatever, and you don't know who your local journalists are, you're doing it wrong, right? You'll have local papers, you'll have really, really influential local media organizations. And if you don't know so if you're a masjid, for example, and you're sat in, I don't know, Dewsbury, right? And you don't know who the Dewsbury Gazette editor is, and I've just made that up. I don't know if Dewsbury Gazette exists, right? If you don't know who they are, then you're doing it wrong. basically. Those relationships are really, really important. But the reality is, on a macro level, most of power in this country is locked into Westminster, and so the influence there is really, really important. As well as to say that even on local issues, your MPs 3 or 4 days a week are sat in Westminster. So it's important that that gets taken into account. But you're right to point out that Westminster isn't the be all and end all, but it is a huge amount of where the power lies. As it pertains to media, I've said politics, your local councils, hugely influential. So everything I've said about Westminster, equally applicable to your local councils, who are your councillors, who are the cabinet members who make decisions on issues that are really, really important to your mosque, your community, your organization, right? Do you know who they are? Do you have a relationship with them, right? You should have standing. So, for example, if you're a mosque and you don't have standing meetings with your councillors, that's a mistake. Or with your council leaders and cabinet members, that's a mistake. And so the strategy doesn't change depending on where it's pointed, whether it's Westminster or your local council.
Thank you for that. So next question is, how can we communicate to influence staff, bring better government staff to improve politics, such as the Treasury?
So first of all, encouraging people to apply for roles is important from within the community. There's always roles going within the civil service, within parties to influence people. That's quite important. How we communicate to influence staff is, first of all, building relationships with them, but also I always say, when you're writing your briefings to try and influence folks in Westminster, explain it. It's like that old Denzel Washington quote. Explain it to them like they're 5 years old, because the level of literacy on Muslims and Islam in this country is really, really low, and often it's influenced by what people see in headlines and media. So I would spend some time getting to know people. And look, this can be as easy as, you'll be surprised, just dropping people an email saying, "Hey, can I buy you coffee?" Right? And can I explain? So if you're an organization that works on, I don't know, Zahra, give me like a small Muslimi based organization, maybe a local refugee center, for example, right? And you want to influence policy, there's nothing wrong with finding out who special advisors are, local, or, whether it's local officers in your council or people who are advising the Foreign Office nationally on issues that you care about, and saying, "Hey, can I buy your coffee and talk about some of the work that we do?" Right? Because it supports them in being able to understand what's happening around the country and different groups that exist, and it can help you build a relationship. And off the back of that, sending them regular briefings on issues as they happen, right? That present facts in 1 or 2 pages that's really easy for them to understand. You have to bear in mind, they come from a very different place to you, right? So they're getting up every day and dealing with 15 to 20 policy issues. So when something on immigration comes up, or on Palestine or Sudan, for example, and they have a piece of paper that explains to them the entire story in 1 page, and then they can go and then brief their bosses as if they know what they're talking about, that's really, really important as well.
We've had hard and fast questions come in, so I'm going to group some of these up. So someone has asked, why do you think the Conservative Party is moving further to the right and increasing hateful, stronger opinions on immigrant communities? And at the same time, if you can answer, is it worth removing Wednesday PMQs, which encourages punch and Judy politics, in order to encourage better collaboration, less hateful comments, and Islamophobia? And I think we can also probably put how can we navigate parliamentary politics with some of the social policy challenges Muslims in politics have faced, e.g., your party, the issues with social conservatism, etc. So I think there's a good group of things maybe we can do.
Yeah, let me take them in order. Why the Conservative Party moving further to the right? That is largely to do with reform. The Conservative Party is being pinched politically in the space that it occupies. So as reform gets more popular, a large chunk of reform's vote come from the Conservative Party, and the Conservative Party are chasing those votes. So the further right that the Conservatives go, the further right that reform go, Conservative, and the more supporters that they gather, Conservatives are forced to chase them to try and bring some of those votes home. This is a really important question because it highlights just the way that politics works. And when I spoke to you guys about pinch points, one of the most so there's a huge amount of the Conservative Party that are sort of one nation conservatives who believe in market solutions to our country, but are pretty liberal as it comes to social issues, who aren't this hard right that you see with Kemi Badenoch. but they're first and foremost survivors as it comes to politics. The most important thing to them is, will I get re-elected and will my party see power? That's the pressure point and pinch point as it pertains to those people. And that is why the Conservative Party is broadly happy to chase reform to try and win some of those votes back, because its principal priority is survival electorally. And that's a really important lesson for us to learn. And it's also what's so dangerous about Labour moving to the right, because the more everybody vacates space to the right, the more it normalizes the language and the kind of politics that becomes status quo by reform. And that's particularly why it's so dangerous. Question 2 was on whether we should scrap PMQs. I think Westminster as a whole and parliamentary debate is a circus and a joke. I think if most ordinary people watched it, they'd think these folks are in a zoo and not parliamentarians discussing serious policy. I would absolutely support looking at PMQs, for example, and the way that debates are done. A fun fact, which tells you how archaic this stupid parliamentary system is: you can't clap in the House of Commons, but you can bark like a dog and meow like a cat and hum and ha and bang the floor and make yourself look like an absolute fool. It's also a fun fact: the distance between the opposition benches are the exact length so a sword can't get from one side to the other, so that you're not allowed to stab your opponents with a sword in Parliament. That gives you a perspective of how archaic and old parliamentary traditions are, and how disconnected they are with the lives of ordinary people. In fact, one of the problems our country faces is how our political structures don't represent the people or the priorities of the people in any meaningful way. And that's one of the issues that we'll have to contend with. What was the third question? Something about your party.
It was how can we navigate parliamentary politics with some of the social policy challenges Muslims in politics have faced, e.g., your party and the issues with social conservatism?
I don't understand the question.
I
Can I
think
ask?
I think yeah, I think what they're saying, well, because it's anonymous, so I can't ping them, but how can we, it's this there are certain social policy changes taking place, and Muslims who are in politics are facing those things. So how do we navigate through this social conservatism that's taking place?
Look, the reality is good politics is about coalition building. And can you work with, now I have my own views. I'm not going to impose my views on the audience here. But what I will say is, when we develop relationships with groups as a community, then we have to look at the priorities of us and other groups and where we can work together and where we can't. And before I got married, my dad told me, you'll never find someone that you agree with 100%. But if you find someone that hits 51% and you get along, go for it, right? And you can work on the other 49. The same is true in politics. You will not find a politician or a political party that you agree with on 10 out of 10 issues. I'll tell you guys a funny story about Zohran Mamdani. So I was recently in New York visiting Zohran Mamdani's campaign. I was privileged enough to meet him and meet his campaign team. And one of the things, he's said this in the media since, that he said that was insightful was, you're never going to meet someone that that agrees with your politics on 12 out of 12 issues. But if you agree with someone on 9 out of 12, get in the car and let's go, right? Let's accomplish that 9 and we'll worry about the others later. And the funny story is, someone came up to him during a campaign event screaming 12 out of 12, baby, which I thought was really, really funny. But you're rarely going to find a politician that you agree with on every single issue, nor will groups and communities agree on everything. But if we're broadly looking at building a similar kind of society and vision, and on values we agree, then we should be driving in the same direction. And there is a concern around isolation of Muslim communities as well, which is of concern. But that's a really
Funnily, yeah,
that's a
Muslims don't even agree 100%
yeah,
on certain things, so we're
yeah.
not even 12 out of 12.
And if we get 5 out of 12, we've done a good day. That's a good day's work, and let's go home.
Exactly. It's a really interesting question come from students. So, as students, are there ways to engage and try to have an impact away from traditional student activism?
There's absolutely ways to have impact. I was the first Muslim NUS Vice President Union Development. Fun fact, I came from the student movement. I think one of the things that's missing from our politics now is a strong student movement. Historically, I know you've all heard this before, but students were part of the group that stopped the UK entering the Vietnam War. We were pivotal as student movement in overturning the apartheid of South Africa. And students have been pivotal to government policy on Gaza and Palestine. I know that because I've seen it, right? The government's narratives and positions on Palestine were seriously influenced by student Palestine encampments and others. So are there ways to engage away from traditional student activism? Yeah, it can be through your ISOCs, it can be through FOSIS, it can be through different student groups, it can be through groups that you set up yourselves. What I'll say is, don't forget the local. All politics is local. So if you're on a campus somewhere, that campus will have local councillors, will have a local council, will have a local MP. All of the things that we've discussed today, you can have serious impacts on national politics through the prism of the local and your local organizations. You don't have to get involved with national occupations to have an impact on our politics.
Awesome. Just, I think there's a lot of questions coming in about Islamophobia and stuff. So I'm just going to group them together. One of the questions is,
Islamophobia is bad.
and that's it. Answered
That's
all the
my answer.
questions. You're done.
Yeah.
What if your local media is Islamophobic?
Yep.
What is the overlap between Islamophobia and anti-Palestinian discrimination, and how do we work with wider groups to tackle this? And there's a question about reform that I think is no, actually, this one is a better one. How can we change the fact that people of religious minorities are expected to leave their religious beliefs at the door when entering politics?
Oh, you're gonna have to remind me of that, by the way, because I'm not writing any of these down, and I have a lot of questions. And for some reason, I've opened this Q&A, and now I'm overwhelmed by the number of questions. So I'm going to
Don't
ignore it.
don't open it. Keep it
It-
closed, and I'll direct them to you.
Ask me that first one again. Sorry. Islamophobia.
Media, and Islamophobia.
Oh, what if
What
you're
if your local media is Islamophobic?
Islamophobic? Well, first of all, I would coordinate a campaign locally to put complaints in and make sure that that Islamophobia is met with a response locally. I would schedule a meeting with the editors and explain that Islamophobia and the kind of coverage that they're running in person to them. And then if that's not working, I would go to Ofcom and submit complaints nationally as well. Make sure, and it's about, again, what I told about discouraging Islamophobia and that last slide I put about, if they're constantly pumping out Islamophobia to no pushback and no complaints, they don't have to look into the eyes of a Muslim and explain the kind of coverage that they've put out because we just disengage, then there's no incentive for folks to change their behavior or to change their kind of their behavior and coverage. Now, sometimes you get things like some news organizations that are just inherently rotten to the core. There's a question as to whether that's worth it to engage, but we'll leave that because it's unlikely that you're engaging directly with the Sun, for example. Question number 2 was on
Overlap between Islamophobia, anti-Palestinian discrimination, how to work with wider groups.
anti-Palestinian discrimination and Islamophobia are extremely overlapped, and in fact, part of the reason I'm convinced why there has been such so many people take such a fervently pro-Israeli position, particularly with the current Israeli administration and the ongoing genocide in Gaza, I am convinced is because of the dehumanization of Palestinian lives and particularly the Islamophobia that informs that. There's this view that Arabs are this backwards, barbaric people who need civilizing by the West, and that Israel is the sort of bastion of democracy that is civilizing the Middle East. And that level of Islamophobia and racism, I think, informs so much of our politics. And this is where I'm going to contradict myself, where I think there does need to be a level of awareness raising and a change in the narrative and the story that we tell people is to be absolutely clear that the way that they're able to desensitize the population to the genocide that has taken place in Gaza and the horrendous policies that are consistently applied on the Palestinian people is to dehumanize them, and that's often through the prism of Islamophobia. In fact, in my view, there has been a coordinated effort by this Israeli administration to pump out Islamophobic content across different media streams as a method to try and dehumanize people to Palestinian lives, but also to push anti-Palestinian policies and racism. And so that needs to be spoken about more. Final question was on.
That was the final question for those three.
Can I answer one that I've seen? Do you mind?
Yeah, yeah, sure, sure, sure.
Well, one of the questions was, how do you reward support? This
Yeah,
is
I was just gonna come to that one. Go for it.
this is important because
Also, well, sorry, whilst you're there, there's
yeah,
I think I grouped three together. So, assuming reform government dominates policy in Westminster, what happens? What needs to happen from a public pressure point of view? And then, how do we reward support? And then, how do we pop the Westminster bubble? I think all three of them you can probably do
yeah.
the same answer.
So rewarding support. I only talk about this because this is really, really important. So there is there will be local councillors, there will be MPs, there will be journalists who are doing enormous amounts of work on issues that Muslims care about, whether that's halal food, Islamophobia, Palestine, Sudan, that sort of stuff, right? If we don't support and reward their work in terms of the sort of warmth of the community, then I think we're doing a disservice. So what does that mean? I would say if you've got local MPs and councillors who are doing good work on the issues that you care about, during Ramadan, during Eid, that word needs to be recognized in the mosques, in the community centers, in these charity dinners that we're doing. They need to feel the warmth of the community, because you have to remember they come to a certain degree from the outside, right? They don't have the sort of lived experience that most Muslims have. They don't have the emotional connection to Sudan or Palestine, or, for example, two mosques here in the UK, because we've been going to them since we were children. And so when they take positions that are good, they should be invited to these events. They should be celebrated and should feel a level of reward. Reward is a really bad word, but I'm using it for lack of a better term. Or, for example, even simple things like emails to say, hey, I saw that you voted in favor of a ceasefire. I want to tell you why that's really important to my family, right? These are things that will encourage future votes, will inform future coalitions that are built. It's really important that our community does this. We've become accustomed to shouting about bad things and not hugging people when they do good things. I'm really struggling for words here, but you get what I mean. How do we pop the Westminster bubble? The way that we do that is by changing some of the archaic structures and systems that Westminster politics is built on. And that's everything from the way that people vote to, guess, the most important thing in popping the Westminster bubble is getting rid of the first past the post current voting system, which means that government, even though it's the party that I am a member of, can get 2/3 of the House of Commons with 33% of vote. It's a ludicrous voting structure. So you don't even need a majority to control more than half of the votes in the House of Commons. A ludicrous position. Things like that. Practical policy changes, the way our politics works is really, really important. And then the last one was in a reform situation, how, if reform were dominating. First of all, this is an MCB position. This is an Ali Milani position. I'm very clear about this. This isn't endorsed or supported by MCB, but my position, and I don't know what MCB's position on this is particularly, every Muslim in this country should do everything they can to stop a reform government coming in. I think it's an existential threat to our communities. We may not be able to do that in time, and if that happens, then there needs to be a coordination and coalition of Muslims in this country resisting for example, what are already really horrendous policies that reform are influencing, but what a reform government will likely lead to is a whole separate conversation. But for me, in the next 2025, in the next 4 years, 3 and a bit years, we should be doing everything we can to stop a reform government coming into power, because I think it's an existential threat to Muslims in this country.
There's a really good question that's come in the chat regarding this, and it's a good segue into it. So it's been asked, with the reform, there are many who see them as an anathema and want nothing to do with them. Is this a strategic mistake? Should we be reaching out to them and trying to build inroads? And I think this comes from the fact that, I mean, recently we had a Muslim Council of Britain campaign called Visit My Mosque. So it was for people to come into the masajid and to have a look at them and basically essentially speak. But one thing that we've realized over the past couple of years and even the past couple of weeks is sometimes we're not having those hard conversations with people. So in this case, when it comes to politics, should we be reaching out to them, trying to build inroads?
Okay, this is a very, very good and important question. And I would say one that I'll give you my opinion on. I don't think there's a right answer. My view is no, that we shouldn't be building inroads or making any efforts to strategically working with reform, because I think there's a line. I think we should work with as broad a coalition group of political figures and political parties as possible. But where I think you draw a line is when a political party crosses into a space where they don't respect our right to be here, they don't respect our faiths and Muslims' position in the story of Britain. And it's very hard to move past that when the when the party's position and narrative and the things that their politicians have said is so antithetical to the views and values of Islam and the safety and future of Muslims in this country. That moves on from coalition building and relationship building into stopping them from having serious power in this country. Now, I don't say that lightly, because I think in terms of the Muslim community as a whole, obviously I'm a political partisan figure myself. I have my own political views that I espouse on the YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to. But and as an activist, but as MCB, as Muslim communities, as charities and organizations, what I would say is generally my advice would be work with everyone, but there has to be a point in which when when your community is spoken about in such disparaging ways, and when people don't view you as part of the country's story, then that has to be resisted. In the same way, when I've spoken about the media, for example, I do not work with. So I'll appear on most media, Zahra, as you know, right? You'll see me on most media channels, usually arguing with some right winger. What you won't see me is on GB News, because there's no point when an organization pumps out so much what I think hateful content, then engaging with it, I think, is counterproductive. The same way you'll never see me do an interview with the Daily Mail, for example. There's a line at which you're wasting your time.
Absolutely amazing, Ali. I wish we had more time, like, in order to answer some of these questions, because they really did come in hard and fast, and there was a lot of them, and they were really, really good, all of them.
Thank you guys so much
Uh,
for having me. This has been brilliant. I hope I haven't rambled too much.
Not at all. If anything, I could probably go on for another half an hour with these questions that are coming in hard and fast, but unfortunately, we don't have that time. We have to finish on time for today. Jazakallah khair to Ali for his time, as always a great speaker on this particular subject, and we really appreciate your time for today. I'm just going to wrap up, inshallah, today's session. So this was the last session, which is quite sad from a host perspective. We please do. So we join the movement, please. We join our WhatsApp channel. That's where we have all the news that comes up about Muslim Council of Britain's current news, or any events that we do, or programs such as this. We have another interesting next month. We have a whole host of other online events as well, and also be a friend of MCB. This is where you basically can join the movement, join what's going on, be an affiliate if you are a part of an organization or you head an organization in the UK. Because we are wrapping up and we've gone slightly over the time, I'm going to conclude for today. Jazakallah khair to Ali for his time, and all the other speakers that we've had on this particular topic. Really important, and I hope that everybody has learnt something from it. We should have started with the name of Allah, but we will conclude with Surah Asr, which is in conclusion to this session. May Allah place a lot of benefit on everything that we have learned, and maybe be able to act upon everything that we have learned as well. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Jazakallah khair.